2020 Democratic primary candidates are practically falling all over themselves to take a stance on how they would regulate or even break up big tech. But campaign filings show that many candidates are using those same companies they want to break up to help spread their messaging.
According to data from the Federal Election Commission, Senator Elizabeth Warren's campaign paid nearly $3 million to big tech firms, including Facebook. South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg spent an astonishing $4.3 million, and Senator Bernie Sanders spent roughly $114,000 on products and services from big tech companies. Joining us now to talk about all of this and more is Ramesh Srinivasan. He's the professor of information study and design media arts at UCLA and author of Beyond the Valley: How Innovators Around the World Are Overcoming Inequality and Creating the Technologies of Tomorrow. Ramesh, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
I love your show, so I'm very happy to join.
That's very kind of you.
Very kind
we
of
love
you.
our show too,
Yeah,
Ramesh.
we do.
I watch it today. I actually watch it today.
That's amazing.
Great.
Ramesh, I do want to ask you a little bit about, how is it somebody who seems to be having a pro-technologist view of the world does end up supporting somebody like Senator Bernie Sanders in the progressive movement, who increasingly is skeptical of big tech and its power over our lives?
Well, I'm also very critical and skeptical of big tech and its power over our lives, because what has happened is a bunch of tech companies that frame themselves like, literally the words we're using right now, as tech companies, have actually overtaken most aspects of human activity, including our political life, right? So giving you a simple example, a company like Facebook describes itself as a tech company, but Facebook is actually the biggest media company in the history of the world, profits off of media, meaning all of our posts, all of our labor, all of our content, but also profits off of the distribution of journalistic media from journalists like yourselves, right? And so Bernie stands with people, he stands with workers, he stands with justice, and insofar as those sorts of issues involve technology companies and technology issues, that's where he goes. He's not interested in pivoting and building his campaign off of sort of tech issues in a vacuum, right? Because all my work in this new book, Beyond the Valley, and really consistent with Bernie Sanders' campaign, which I've been informally advising and I'm being vetted to be a surrogate for, is really not about technology itself, but about what kind of world, what kind of economics, what kind of politics we want in this country. And that transformation is what he stands for. And I, as a former engineer and a writer about technology, stand with him on those issues as well.
Mm-hmm. What did you make of the exchange recently that got a lot of attention between AOC and Mark Zuckerberg around the specific issue of the lack of fact-checking around political ads on Facebook? I mean, I'm kind of two minds, because on the one hand, it's not great for people to just be able to run whatever misleading political ads they want on a platform that has such reach and where misinformation spreads so rampantly anyways. On the other hand, I'm deeply uncomfortable with one guy, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg or you or me or anyone else, essentially making the call of what passes muster and what doesn't. So how do you think about issues like that?
Yeah, so, we value free speech and we believe in free speech in this country. And of course, that's a great thing. But free speech in a vacuum, without sort of editorial and journalistic integrity and control, is actually a mechanism of supporting the voices of the powerful, and increasingly with Facebook's algorithms, supporting the voices of gaslighters and trolls and inflammatory content over the voices of actually fact-based, rational, analytical, or even opinion-based, that's based on grounded fact reporting, right? So the answer to this for me is to not just sort of say, hey, I support free speech and that's what Facebook is about. When Facebook is profiting off of political content and also algorithmically profiting off making visible inflammatory content. And I'd be happy to elaborate on that with you. So to your great question, Crystal, neither Mark Zuckerberg, who is not trained in journalism or in journalistic ethics, and nor is it his responsibility to do so, nor yourself, nor myself should be the people in charge of monitoring and vetting and validating this political news content, this political ad content. It should be independent journalists. Facebook should be hiring independent journalists in substantial numbers, paying them and supporting them accordingly to actually do this kind of work. And the reason why is Facebook monetizes, as I said earlier, They monetize and profit off of media and political and journalistic content. And they basically extract that content from people who actually do the journalistic work like yourselves. And they now need to help everybody else out and contribute to a journalistic cycle that's rooted in democracy. And that's why I'm arguing.
Yeah, but I mean, aren't you also uncomfortable with Facebook hiring all these independent journalists? And I think, look, I'm from the right. I know how all these journalists are going to think. I've seen this fact-checking operation. It's been a complete disaster when they tried to roll that out. Neither side's ended up being happy, and basically the project is being squashed. So, I mean, ultimately, I think what we're actually having a conversation here is we're uncomfortable with the power of Facebook. But I don't actually see a viable option other than breaking up and destroying Facebook. And I don't think that is a particularly viable option. I mean, like breaking up, separating WhatsApp, Instagram, okay, maybe. But, the alternative is we just have no Facebook. And I mean, is the government going to be in a position to do something like that?
No, they're not. And you're right to be skeptical of that, Sagar.
Right.
And, Facebook is going to continue to grow. And Facebook, by the way, is symptomatic of a much larger question of big technology's horizontal integration, meaning it's a monopolistic activities that can also be applied to describing Google, Amazon, and its ilk as well. Mm-hmm. I guess what I'm asking for is for Facebook and other companies to give up some power and control in terms of allowing people like ourselves, a coalition of people, to actually have power over the design, the vetting and the design of its systems themselves. So, I'll give you some examples I give in Beyond the Valley. I talk about examples like predictive policing, machine learning algorithms that we're finding out, turning out to be racist, informing police that Black and brown communities, just by being Black and brown, are more at risk. And I'm saying, what if Black Lives Matter was involved in designing these systems, or even deciding whether these systems should even exist? So similarly, let's apply that logic to Facebook. What if a coalition of journalists who more or less have integrity, I'm not talking about the gaslighters, I'm not talking about the people who profit off of inflammatory content or spread fake content, what if they came together to basically audit, influence the design, and actually have a vetting process and actually having real power over what Facebook does and does not do? And how do we not just apply that logic to Facebook, but big tech itself, which is encapsulating and capturing every aspect of our lives? This is something I make the argument about in the book, that big tech is not just about a tech platform. It's the language by which all our possibilities are being experienced, right? It's the when I get insurance, I get it through some mysterious algorithm. But what does that algorithm know about me? Maybe it involved buying my credit card records, like we saw with Cambridge Analytica.
And so what is your view on potentially breaking up big tech, or, some people view these as essentially public utilities, nationalizing Facebook, Twitter, some of these entities? Because at bottom, there's still the concern, even if you bring in this coalition of journalists, about a bias in favor of corporate power. And you see that with a lot of our mainstream outlets. And I'm sure as someone who supports Sanders, you've seen this as well. I mean, the Washington Post, right? Mainstream journalists, independent journalists, not the quote unquote, purveyors of like gaslighting or controversial content really, but they're very unfair to him. They're consistently unfair to him because they don't understand the working class. They don't serve the working class in their coverage. And so there is this sort of consistent pro-corporate bias among our news organizations. So how do you get around that without just actually diminishing the power of these companies, either through breaking them up or nationalizing them?
Yeah, I mean, I support definitely significant regulatory reform. I support the careful regulation of these companies. Maybe we need to figure out mechanisms where these companies don't become somehow the purveyors of all our media and news, but maybe, as Sagar kind of pointed out earlier, that's sort of a bit of a lost cause. I think it was just incredible when Senator Sanders was doing that, as I know you both reported on, that Washington Post live interview, while calling out the Washington Post for its own political economic biases right in front of them. This is why I love Senator Sanders, among other reasons. And I do think we should, with the technology companies, we should actually remember some of the great writing from 30 years ago. Manufacturing Consent just turns 30 years old by Noam Chomsky, which actually basically explains how the stories that are chosen to be covered by the corporate media reflect corporate and political interests. So yes, I think it's important that this new board that has governance and power, whether it involves breaking up big tech or regulating it in some form or giving journalists like yourselves a voice, that new group of people can't just be Washington Post journalists. It can't just be New York Times journalists. It can't just be MSNBC pundits. It can't, we need Crystal Ball and Sagar on that,
There we go. A solution we can all agree on.
All right, I'm in now.
Ramesh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramesh.
Congrats on the book.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's great to join you.
Yeah,
Thank you both.
Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. And we'll have more Rising after this.